Good morning. This is Chewing the Gristle and my co-host, Tim Conroy. Welcome, Tim.
Hey, brother Al from sunny Florida. How are you doing today?
It's cold here in Indiana, but we have a wonderfully warm poet. I want to welcome our poet today, the Poet Laureate of Logan, Utah, Shanan Ballam. Welcome, Shanan.
Thank you very much. I'm so pleased to be here and to get to talk to you, Al and Tim. Thank you.
Shanan Ballam is the Poet Laureate from the city of Logan, Utah. Her third and new poetry collection, Inside the Animal, the collected Red Riding Hood poems, was a semifinalist for the 2017 Hillary Gravendike Prize Poetry Book Competition from the Inlandia Press. It was published by Main Street Rag in June 2019. It is available for purchase at Main Street Rag Bookstore. She is a senior lecturer at Utah State University English Department. She has won awards for teaching and poetry, as well as serving on several arts and writers boards. We're very happy to have her. Shanan, can you talk to us about your poetry journey and how you came to poetry and who were your early mentors?
Yeah, definitely. So I started writing poetry as soon as I can remember picking up a pencil. So I think I wrote my first poem probably when I was about 5 years old, and I would keep it in little journals. My grandmother really liked my work, and she was very supportive. And so I would write poems for her and do little paintings with watercolors, and she and my grandfather would hang those up on their walls. And so that was really important. And then when I was in third grade, I wrote a poem, and my teacher, Mrs. Higgs, read my poem in front of the whole grade. And it made me realize that maybe there was, I had talent with that. And then other teachers throughout elementary school, junior high, and high school all supported my work and encouraged me to enter youth contests, which I would place in, honorable mentions and things like that. Then later, I was fortunate enough to have some wonderful teachers at Utah State University. My first mentor was Ken Brewer, who was the second Poet Laureate of Utah. And he taught me, how to really be vulnerable in my work. And that was really important. And then when I was 29, I decided I really needed to get an MFA. And so I entered a low residency program at the University of Nebraska, Omaha. And that's where I met 3 mentors who've been incredibly important to me: Teri Grimm, Catie Rosemurgy, and then my most important teacher of my life is Bill Trowbridge. He was the Poet Laureate of Missouri from 2012 to 2016. I was fortunate enough to work with him for an entire year. And he's just amazing. He and I are still in contact, and he's still supporting me, even though it's been, many years since I graduated from my program. And I'm just so fortunate to have those people in my life.
Wonderful. Tim.
I have to ask, because of this past year, how has COVID impacted your writing? How has this moment of sort of chaos, socially and politically, impacted you as an artist?
Well, when it first happened in March, and we had to switch. I teach at Utah State University, and they shut everything down. And so we had to go completely online. And that was a real challenge. And so it took up a lot of time, a lot of writing time. But then after the semester was over, I was able to do a lot of writing in the summer, and I decided to try my hand at writing sonnet every day and villanelles, because I really wanted to discipline myself and to really try to force myself to do the iambic pentameter and the form. And it was a very fruitful time for me. And I think, one thing is I am actually I'm more of an isolating person anyway. So I like to be alone. And it was, this is probably bad to say, but I felt a sense of relief that I didn't have to socialize and that I could just be myself and do my work. But as the year went on, I hit a writer's block and became kind of depressed, actually very depressed. So last fall was difficult as I had to reinvent my classes and teach. I taught face-to-face, but we taught in cohorts so that I was only teaching, 5 people at a time. And that was very difficult, and I had a lot of trouble. And so after about July, I haven't written very much this year, and I'm hoping to get back into it now that I just feel more refreshed, with the election being over and politics maybe settling down a little bit, and the hope of the vaccine helping us out. So I guess in a way, I thought I was, an isolating person and antisocial, but I think I actually need more contact. So that's how it's affected me this year.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. For our listeners, this is sort of a 2-part question, but describe a little bit of how you view what your poetry style is, and talk about the rituals around your writing process. Whether you're a morning writer, whether you're a nighttime owl, whether you do it with a pencil and paper, or how you do it.
So as far as style goes, what I'm really interested in is musicality in the work. I've studied all of the, alliteration, assonance, consonants, partial consonants, rich consonants. I try to incorporate the music into my work. So that's the thing that I strive for the most. What I do is I try to, when I get into my writing, which I need to do again, but when I'm the most fruitful, when I'm the most productive is when I'm writing in longhand in a notebook, 3 pages a day, and just forcing myself to write those 3 pages, writing just anything that comes to mind, not worrying about, I have to write a poem. But usually what happens is in about a page or 2, a poem just starts emerging. And then I take those notebook entries and I, set them out and I type up the lines that seem like they're promising. And then I try to combine those with other entries and then just build the poem based on that, while, paying close attention to the musicality and the syntax, obviously, trying to find the precise word. I use Rhyme Zone. I don't know if you guys know what that is. I love Rhyme Zone so that I can go in and, just make sure I'm thinking of all the synonyms, all the slant rhymes, and able to, especially when I was writing the sonnets, so that I just made a list of all the rhyming words and then went through and plugged those in where they were appropriate. So that's pretty much my process. And
so are you using a timer, Shannon, or are you just kind of blocked out a certain length of time, or you go, you write as long as it feels like it's coming, and then you kind of go to what you have to do for the day?
I just spend as much time as I need to write 3 pages.
Okay, gotcha.
Pages in a 9x11 or whatever size notebook, just a regular notebook. And then I have, dozens and dozens of notebooks that I'll go back through and revisit every once in a while to see what I can pull from those and build new stuff. And it's exciting to go back and see what I was thinking, 3 or 4 years ago, and try to incorporate those thoughts into what I'm doing today.
Well, how about reading us a couple poems and tell us what collection they're from, or if they're new. And if you're reading from a collection, tell us a little bit about the collection.
Okay. I think I'll read the first poem in my collection, Pretty Marrow. Pretty Marrow is an exploration of my parents' alcoholism. My father, when I was growing up, my father was a severe alcoholic, and he ended up passing away last March of a respiratory illness.
Wow.
And so I'm not sure if that was COVID or not, but he had severe health problems because of drinking. And then as I got a little bit older, my mother became an alcoholic. And so what I wanted to do with this particular collection was to show my readers, the effects of alcoholism on children and on the family. And so the first poem is about my mother being in the hospital. So when she was, I was 30 years old, she decided she wanted to drink herself to death. And she did this on purpose. And so she stopped eating for 3 months and was just drinking and drinking. I'm the oldest child in the family, and so I had to take control of the situation as much as I could. And I had power of attorney and all these things, and it was extremely stressful. She did survive. She's actually in the hospital right now because of alcoholism. So this is called Shocked. Think of the tick, tick, tick of wires against an unsuspecting pine over and over until the buzz of electricity nuzzles through. Think of the blazing white lick of stripped wire on stripped wire, sparks, white slashes, misfires. Think of chewing on foil, tangy metal on metal, a dull ache in your skull as your eyes roll back. Then think, the nurse is talking about your mother, who guzzled liquor for years till the nerve sheaths dissolved in her brain. She hears rats scratch under cold hospital walls, sees ants pour out of cracks. Spanish program on TV, your mother interprets the intricate plot. Your mother does not speak Spanish, and she helps with crossword puzzles, spells Mai Tai, MMBAXRW. Remember, she told you that as a kid, she thought LMNO was one letter, elemento. When you were a kid, your job was to switch the laundry, and your mother warned, don't touch the washer and dryer at the same time. So you stood, wet socks lumped in your hands like dead rats, your parents' screams surging through the pipes above you. You held your breath, touched the cold, ungrounded machines at the same time, your blood shrieking with a shock more terrible and delicious than licking the icy nub of a battery, the dull purr and whiz of it on your tongue. Then, like now, you ignore every warning, because maybe like her, you never stop needing to harm yourself, just in case there's something more alive inside the squealing drill of pain.
What a powerful piece.
I'm going to continue on with this collection. This is a poem about my stepfather. My stepfather, as I said, was an alcoholic, and he didn't like me. I was 4 years old when he came into my life, and we never got along, and yet I wanted him to love me, like, how that is, and just really wanted him to care about me and to love me, but I don't think he ever did. I'm not sure if he was capable of that. I think the alcoholism was part of that, but I always felt a great sense of sympathy for him and protection. I think children of alcoholics want to protect their parents. And so this is kind of about that. And this is called No Apologies. And it's also from Pretty Marrow. So no apologies for my stepfather. Oh, Dad, not this. Every day you drink a fifth of vodka you stashed behind the fabric softener. Did I tell you I'm trying to quit? Did I tell you in my dreams orange stars of fungus sprout from my palms, my forearms? Stinging blossoms blister my skin. Spores pour brown poison from my face. Sour bourbon, mildewed garment, hangs on my body, collar buttoned too tight to the throat, and I wake wishing you a cool jade pool in which to bathe your body, your young body, sun-browned and towering. And I wish you your long black hair pulled back in a ponytail, and your mind scrubbed clean of the Philippines, the barracks, the rifles, your torn and tortured spine. I wish you washed clean by someone who never speaks, whose tender hands leave a dusting of gold on your face, your chest, someone who can drain everything bitter inside you, the secrets you never speak. And I will meet you, and we will begin again in a paradise of no apologies.
And that's a great piece. I mean, so powerful. Brother Al, we'll turn it
Yes.
back to you.
Yeah, your poems have a lot of resonance. How much time, because this is important, you did discuss that you write at least 3 pages in a notebook and then go back to them, but how much time do you spend on revision, and when do you know if your poem is finished?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I get that question a lot from my students, because the students want to just write the poem and not revise it. And what I like to tell them is the real pleasure comes through the revision. When you see the real poem start to emerge from the murk. And so I would say sometimes some poems I've spent, there is a villanelle. I'm not sure I included that in the work that I sent to you. But I actually counted the hours I spent on that so that I could talk to my students about it, and it was 40 hours for that poem. That's not completely typical, but often, I'll write something and then go back to it, let it sit for a while, go back to it. It's difficult to explain when you know a poem is done. I can't remember who said it. A poem is never finished, it's just abandoned. Who said that? So I think, in a way, when I've cleaned it up and I know that it's technically right, with the sound, I read things out loud multiple times to make sure that it sounds right and that the rhythms are right. And I always suggest to my students, read your stuff aloud so that you can hear where there's little hiccups or little bumps in it, where you can maybe smooth those out using different syntax or a different word that's going to create a better rhythm within the piece. And so I think once I do all that, then I feel like if I've completed it and done as much work as I can, and it sounds right when I read it out loud every time, then I say, okay, it's finished.
Okay. That is very good advice. The original writing of a poem is just planting the tulip bulb. Everything else comes afterwards. What poets are you reading today, and who is fueling your imagination?
Okay. Yeah, there's a wonderful poet in southern Utah, and I think they're going to change the name of the university because right now it's Dixie State. but I think they're going to change that name. She's down in St. George. Her name is Cindy King, and she writes some amazing stuff and she visited my class last fall, where she talked about studying the anthology called Stand Up Poetry. It was edited by Charles Harper Webb. And so she's been really important to me just in thinking about the way she's approaching work. And I really like her. And then I thrive off of I have a poetry group, and it's been a group that's been going for about 20 years. We have some wonderful people in there. Some of them have been my students and are now in the group with me. And one guy is named Isaac Tim, and he is the oldest person in Utah with muscular dystrophy. And he grew up in southern Utah in kind of a poor area. His work is just remarkable. So, I think a lot of times it's just, my own students' work is great. I love seeing what they can produce. Yesterday, I asked them to do an imitation of Elizabeth Bishop's In the Waiting Room. And we used an exercise from the practice of poetry from Robin Bain and Chase Twitchell, which I would recommend for students out there, people who are emerging poets, is to get that book, The Practice of Poetry, and do the exercises in there. And I gave my students 8 minutes to write this imitation of In the Waiting Room, and it was remarkable. The people who shared their work just did this beautiful work where they entered into a book, and then they talked about, kind of the dislocation of self when they hear an outside noise. So, and then obviously people also like, my favorite poet is Louise Glück. So she continues to fuel my work. I just find her remarkable. I think everybody does. And, Sylvia Plath, Lucille Clifton. I'm really interested in the newer works that comes out in the New Yorker. I love Rita Dove, Margaret Atwood, Terrence Hayes. Yeah.
Can you share a couple other poems with us?
Yeah.
That would be wonderful. And again, please share where they come from, and if you want to talk about if it's from a new collection or a different collection, if you want to share something about that, that'd be wonderful.
Okay. So I'll read a couple from my book, Inside the Animal, the collected Red Riding Hood poems. The first one I'm going to read is called Red Riding Hood to Her Mother. And this is a pantoum. And so I'll just explain a little bit about the collection. So the collection is all about the characters and different objects that appear in the Red Riding Hood fairy tale. I chose to use the Red Riding Hood tale as kind of a boundary to allow myself to talk about, very personal things without necessarily exposing the self. And this is something that I ask my students to do as well, is to choose a fairy tale and to try to write through with using one of the characters or an object from that story to discuss their own emotional truth without exposing themselves as autobiographical. And it's been really helpful. A lot of students have been able to write about really personal, emotional things while having that boundary of the fairy tale to allow them to speak through there. So as I was saying earlier, my parents are alcoholics, and my mother has been a problem, to put it lightly. And so this poem is written in the voice of Red Riding Hood, but I think you might be able to notice that this is me talking about my own mother. Red Riding Hood to her mother. Under meek starlight, through darkness twisting, with your honeyed voice you led me, mother. Stunned, the moon's white eye misting, dimmed skeleton trees, the gushing river. With your honeyed voice you led me, mother. Folded me warm in your fingers, the fire dimmed my skeleton, blood, the gushing river. I did not know, could love expire? Priest alive in your fist, ember of fire, I begged you to spare me, take me back home. I did not know then that love could expire. Could the heart ossify to bone? I begged you to spare me, take me back home. I was warned, mother, not to follow you. The heart ossifies, numb, blind, bone. I was just a little starlight smudging through. I knew, mother, not to follow you. I saw your gritted smile when I found my way back. I was just a little starlight smudging through your sky. You thrust me a basket to pack. I saw your gritted smile when I found my way back. Stunned, the moon's white eye misting, I cried. But you thrust me a basket to pack. You sent me meek into darkness, twisting. And I think
Wonderful.
Another one I'll read is another one from the same collection. And this is Wolf Wears Red Riding Hood's Cape. The reason I'm going to read this one is because, as I was saying earlier with my father, I wanted to understand him and his side of tenderness. And he had tenderness and he had fear, and he was very vulnerable, and yet was very cruel, and kept his alcoholism created that cruelty in him. But so when I first thought about writing these Red Riding Hood tales, the wolf represented to me, aspects of my father as an angry, kind of a predatory animal. And the wolf also represented my sister's ex-husband, who was also a predator. But as I thought through it, I didn't want to just reduce the wolf to one stereotype. And I wanted to show the complexity of the wolf in my book. And so this is called Wolf Wears Red Riding Hood's Cape. When the story is silent behind its hard covers, Wolf slips into the cape, becomes a mind of clean wind. His clumsy paws arrange delicate shawls around grandmother's shoulders. Gently, he combs her thin hair. A wonderful sadness washes through him when he wanders in fields glistening bluebells, their heads bowed in reverence. He hears their soft prayers. For hours, he labors with a paintbrush, watercolors, paints sunsets for grandmother, orange, purple, gold. She fastens his pictures high on her walls. He floats in a cold river, opens his eyes underwater, feels the pure ecstasy of distortion. He sleeps next to grandmother. In the dark, she tells him of baby Moses, adrift in his tiny ark. One thing I'd like to say about that poem is earlier when in our discussion, I was talking to you about my grandparents being so supportive of me. And so the aspects in that poem are actually me. I used to comb my grandmother's hair and paint the sunsets for her that she put on the walls. And she would tell me Bible stories when we were going to bed. And so I love my grandmother, and a lot of the poems in this book are about the grandmother. And that grandmother, I wanted to give the grandmother complexity and give her a voice. And so the grandmother in my book is my grandmother.
Okay.
It's wonderful.
So you have the entire fairy tale, all the characters.
Yes.
Tim.
Yeah, let's dig into your craft a bit. And what are the poetic elements you tend to rely on for your poems, for your craft, and how do you approach line breaks and openings and endings of poems?
Okay. Line breaks are something that I'm really studied and wanted to make sure that I could create an energy off the end of every line. And so often I'll break on a verb, or, I mean, this is a hard and fast rule, but, verbs or nouns, something that feels like it's kind of shining off the end of the line and can carry that energy down into the next line, something that might be a surprise and maybe twist the meaning just a little bit for the reader. As far as craft goes, I would say I talked a little bit about musicality, and that really commands my work, but metaphor commands my work as well. Often, I'll think of something, some kind of a word or a thought for a title, and then I can see how it might work in multiple ways, like how it might work, just literally, and then work on maybe one or two other levels. Recently, I was teaching Stafford's Traveling Through the Dark, and we talked about how that title is literally traveling through the dark, but there's a metaphorical darkness. And so that would be an example of something that I try to do, is to create that literal, but then that metaphorical darkness or whatever it might be. So I try to do that. I also think about stanzas. I talk to my students about how in Italian stanza means a room. And I love to think about moving between the different rooms and how the different rooms might have a different mood, a different feeling to them, how you can control that. So I like to think about line breaks and stanzas and just the white space and how much energy that can create. What I like to do with openings is read my favorite poems and see how they've opened their work, and then try to mimic that in some way. I like to try to start in the middle of things, in the middle of action, so that we're not, spending a lot of time getting into the work, that you can just get right in the middle of the action. I talk to my students a lot about how important titles are, because they can just deliver so much information that you then don't have to, provide within the text of the poem itself. And then I ask my students too to really pay attention to connotation. How many different levels of meaning does each word have, and how can we adjust that? So I think basically, I try to get the workout, in my longhand, in my notebook, and then I go back and think about every level of the poetic elements, the musicality, metaphor, the title, and just kind of go through those things. Sometimes they happen at once, but for advice for emerging poets, younger poets, to think about isolating those elements and discussing them, or going into your poem one at a time and thinking about, okay, now the title. I think one book that I would highly recommend, which is something that which is what I teach in class, is In the Palm of Your Hand by Steve Cowett. That has an amazing chapter about revision.
That's great. Brother Al, this is sort of going into the question you want to ask, so I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Yeah. Shannon, you've mentioned two books already, and I don't mind you mentioning them again, but what resources or craft books or practices do you recommend to poets or emerging poets?
Okay. One of my favorites is the Poetry Home Repair Manual by Ted Kooser. I had the pleasure of working with Ted Kooser. He was the Poet Laureate of the US when I was in Nebraska. So I got to do workshops with Ted Kooser. And then Ted Kooser was also Mae Swenson speaker. And Mae Swenson is a famous poet who was born in Logan, Utah. And so we have a speaker series, and Ted Kooser came to USU, and I was able to be on a panel with him. So I'd recommend that. I've worked with Kim Adamizio as well, and her book, Ordinary Genius, and also the Poet's Companion, which was co-written with Doria and Locks. I hope I pronounced that right. Both of those are great books. I'd also recommend, some more technical books. The Prosody Handbook. It's pretty technical, but that's Carl Shapiro. I learned a lot from that. And I would also recommend something like the Longman Dictionary of Poetic Terms, where you could just go through there and look at all the different terms and just learn about those terms and think about those terms and how you might apply some of those to your own work.
Okay. I know for us, both Tim and I, in doing these interviews, we've found so many more resources that we can tap into, and we really appreciate that because we don't write in a vacuum. Tim.
Anyway, I want you to, we're getting down to the end, so let our listeners know how to get hold of your book, remind people how to get hold of your books, and then read a couple last poems.
Okay, so the Inside the Animal, the Collected Red Riding Hood poems, is available through Main Street Rag Store, and Pretty Marrow is available on Amazon. And you could visit my website, and that's shannonballam.org, and there are links where you could buy those books as well. I also have a chapbook. It's called The Red Riding Hood Papers, and that was published through Finishing Line Press and is available on Amazon or on my website. I think I'll read a couple more poems just to highlight and celebrate my grandmother. So I'll read the last two poems in Inside the Animal. They're short poems. So I always thought my grandmother wanted a different life. And so I basically allow her in this book to start a new life. So this poem is called Grandmother Inside the Wolf. She is all glitter, sinew, his thudding heart her metronome. She whirls weightless, turning and turning in the gauze of beginning. She is a hummingbird inside a glass cage, feathers thrumming pink and green, smearing his insides with the bright sugar of survival until Wolf's mind is a wild white whirring. Dizzy, he sweats and retches. There is no stopping her twirling, thinking, this is love. Oh, there's no turning back the ecstatic clock. And then this final poem is the final poem in the collection. And it's, I wanted it to be ambiguous. So it's about me, but it's about my grandmother, and it could be about any of the characters in the book. And it's called Birthday. My face, my trail have begun to disappear. Am I real? I close my eyes and drag my life, heavy tail, into the dark portal. I understand falling, how it feels to be a white fountain with no beginning, a continuous subtraction. But didn't I vow to shed losses, become vaster? I awake in a dark and snowy canyon. the sky a nest of bristled stars. I am not cold. My heart beats strong. I am not afraid. In a new body, I smolder, my eyes, keen and animal, adjusting to the dark.
Wow. Has your grandmother read your poetry?
No, my grandmother died in 1990.
Oh, I'm sorry for that. I'm sure she knows anyway. And because I like the idea that you give her a new life, a different life. That's a nice concept. Not just concept, it's wonderful that we can do that as a writer. And Tim and I both want to thank you very much for being the subject of our interview today on Chewing the Gristle. It has been wonderful. And again, thank you to the educator and the poet laureate of the city of Logan, Utah, Shanan Ballam. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.